Warning, this podcast does not introduce any new information outside the Foundation's curriculum. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey there, friends and curious minds tuning in. Welcome to another episode of Real Doctors, Real Friends, the podcast that takes you on the behind-the-scenes tour of the world of medicine, one episode at a time. I'm Sana Samadi, your friendly second-year med student trying to juggle late-night classes. I actually just finished a final exam and just came from shadowing.
Congrats.
So, yeah, perfect example. Whether you're starting your pre-med journey already or you're knee-deep in med school chaos or you're just fascinated by the mysteries of healthcare, you are in the right place. And we're thrilled to be the first official podcast affiliated with the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry in Canada here at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. So our goal is very simple. It's to create a space where we can explore the most pertinent topics in healthcare, whether you're a current med student, a hopeful pre-med, or just someone that's curious about the field. This podcast is for you. And let's be honest, staying up to date with healthcare news is a little bit more than just cramming for the MMIs or prepping for exams. It's about understanding the ever-evolving landscape of medicine and how it affects our future as physicians, or even our current role as students. Plus, for all you pre-meds out there, this could be a great way for you to prepare for those big interviews by diving into real-world topics that matter. So sit back, relax, and let's make this educational journey a little bit more fun and a lot less intimidating. Joining me are my co-hosts, Dr. Roshan Abraham, who knows his way around the primary care clinic like a pro, and Dr. Shereen Hamza, who can probably teach physiology in her sleep. How is everyone doing today?
I'm doing great, Sana. It's always a good day when we get to dive into such important topics. Shereen, how about you? How's life treating you this week?
Hey everyone, it's been a whirlwind of a week, balancing everything from teaching to prepping for this episode. But I'm excited to discuss the important topic of accessibility in medicine with our special guest today, Dr. Franco Rizzuti, the President of Public Health and Preventative Medicine. Franco, it's fantastic to have you here. Do you ever have a chance to unwind, or is it always a whirlwind of public health crises and preventative measures?
Well, it is absolutely my pleasure to be here today. And, I will say public health is busy. Post-pandemic, it feels like we're always doing something. There's always a public health issue. I won't call it crisis anymore, but issue of the day. But I do get time to unwind. It's, I think, really important for us in healthcare to find these ways to keep us well. So,
absolutely.
Really happy to be here and talk about it. This is also a nice kind of change from day-to-day public health isms.
Awesome.
Part. I am actually curious, how did you get involved with the AMA? Because you and I have gone back and forth. Like, it's funny, this is the first time we're actually seeing each other in person for the first time.
It is, yeah.
And yet we've been on like meetings together over the years. He was with RDOC when I was with Para, and then you were with Para as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you were the president?
I was the president for 2 years.
For 2 years. Oh, yeah, you were. Oh, now I remember.
Yeah.
And I was on the exec. And so we always missed each other.
Yeah.
And we've had conference calls and phone calls in the past, and so this is actually the first time where we get to chat.
It's always so interesting seeing someone in person
it
for
really
the first
is,
time.
yeah.
Although I could recognize you because of your
I know the loud shirts are a dead giveaway.
I love the shirts.
So yes, how did I get involved with AMA?
The AMA,
It was interesting. So as a medical student, there was always these calls to join the representative forum, be a medical student observer. Mm-hmm. I was involved with the Canadian Medical Student Association, so CMSA, and never really got involved with the AMA side. I did more the CFMS side, local student politics and med school challenges, etc. But just didn't have time to do anything with AMA. And then as I moved into residency, was involved with Para and started attending AMA RF, which can be a very interesting meeting.
Have you been to that yet?
Oh yeah, I'm the rep, so I have to go to all of them.
You know, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, like I will give MD Financial and Medicus credit. They had popcorn at their booth this RF, so you could actually go get popcorn. So yeah, it was great. Popcorn was appropriate, but got involved as a resident, and then stayed involved, and then somehow got arm wrestled a little bit into chairing or taking on the presidency of the section, and nobody wants to take it over. So yeah, I've just been the, seat warmer in a sense.
Okay.
We throw around a lot of acronyms here, but PARA is the Professional Association for Resident Physicians in Alberta.
I was just going to ask that.
So apologies. Sorry, Sana, I had interrupted you because this is actually the first time that we're actually meeting face to face in I think forever. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no worries. So what I was going to say, Franco, is let's kind of just start from the top. Could you give us a quick background of just everything that you're doing? You're wearing 1,000 hats. How did you get there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, I'll start to say that I think the hats accumulate. And many of us in medicine, right, it's the biggest challenge is saying no, because the hats and opportunities just keep coming.
And they look good.
They do
too.
look good.
So
they do look good.
why
Sometimes
not?
they clash, but most times they look pretty good.
That's very good.
But I will say, so for me, born and raised in Calgary.
Me too.
Yeah,
nice.
I did. And I did all my schooling in Calgary. That wasn't the plan. So the plan was, do a science degree. You can get a science degree anywhere. I'll do it at home. But I'll go away for grad school. So my undergrad was molecular biology. So yeah, U of C, cellular, molecular, and microbial biology, a big mouthful. Loved it. Then I switched gears for grad school. Went actually to the Faculty of Education and did work on adult learning, pedagogy, and looking at physician leadership. So how do you teach physicians these, non-med expert can-med roles? So spent a lot of time there. Got involved in the Graduate Student Association, so student leadership in grad school. Prior to that, it was all student development work I did. So, how do you build leadership programs, build that sort of capacity for students? So did that through the Office of Leadership, etc. But yeah, it was grad school, got involved in student leadership. Again, somebody said, you join as you always do, right? You're a representative. Somebody says you should join exec. And then somebody said, you should run for president. And I was like, okay, well, maybe if you think so, but really, I needed to be arm wrestled a bit into it.
Yeah.
Ran for president, then did a second term, got into med school during grad school. So the first time I applied to med school, waitlisted, didn't get in. Got in on my second application, deferred a year to finish grad school.
Yeah.
Then started med at U of C. Got involved in CMSA. Again, similar story where I was like, oh, maybe I'll do academics. And people said, well, maybe you should run for president. Ran for president, elected as class president. Got involved with CFMS that same year. And, really enjoyed the complexities of medical education, right? It's a different world. And, I often find, especially for learners, I'll say this, for medical students, for the public, we think the system is this, absolute marvel, super complex system. And it is complex. But once you peek behind and you realize the amount of chewing gum and duct tape, it's hard to unsee that. But I think what's really enlightening once you see that is you realize your ability to have influence and change.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Is you realize that, there's ways to optimize and fix things.
Yeah.
And so that kind of just kept rolling. So, I will say I was very strongly exploring thinking adult neurology, clinical neuroscience. That was where I thought I was going to go. Took some time off during clerkship, had a death in the family, was working with accreditation for the med school, and then was in a motor vehicle collision, had a back injury. And that got me kind of just rethinking, what did I want to do? A few friends were in public health and said, hey, have you thought about public health? Honestly, I had no idea what public health was at that point.
Yeah.
Did one elective in public health, loved it. Did my CARMS tour, and that was back in the day when we were still flying for the CARMS tour for both public health and adult neurology.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, that year, public health was going West Coast to East Coast, and adult neurology was going East Coast to West Coast. So it was a lot of back and forth across the country.
Yeah.
My rank order was all about fit. And I'll say this for those listening, as you're thinking about CARMS, it is all about fit.
Yes.
Is is the program the right fit? Does it have the right vibe? Does the program director get you? Do you see yourself there? Are you going to thrive? I think that's truly the most important part of, the match process. So I matched to Calgary Public Health, my first choice. Did 5 years here. Got involved with para at that time. So finance first, then president. That tends to be my shoe in, as I always go to finance and operation side first. Yeah, I like the balance sheets.
You have a good finance background?
Not formally, but I guess
just
when
like it?
I like it, and when you're been on boards for I don't know, better part of 2 decades coming up, like you get it or you don't.
Yeah.
So got involved with para, got involved then with RDOC, so Resident Doctors of Canada, was, as I said, involved with Canadian Federation of Medical Students, and then I will say trained during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So, in public health, we joke a little bit that you might have one good like pandemic or large event of your career.
Yeah.
I had that in the middle of training.
Wow.
So completely changed, the course of my training, completely changed what we did.
Yeah.
I was part of the team that got to kind of stand up the medical student contact tracing team in Calgary.
Oh, wow.
Supported some of the big meat factory, so the Cargills, the Lilydale outbreaks.
Yeah.
It was a lot of rapidly building up teams. I'll say, I think the highlight and my favorite part of these early days is, as we had the medical students, we co-designed a QI sprint into our core. So we were doing parallel QI designs as we were doing it every week.
Wow.
So by the time we had handed over the contact tracing from the medical students doing it to capacity being built within HS, I think we had gone through 13 or 14 design sprint iterations.
Yeah.
So like better than Six Sigma sort of evolution.
No kidding.
But it was one of the things we built in from the get-go. And I have to say, I think that was the best, kind of serendipitous piece we did.
Yeah.
Because we were able to refine workflows as we went. So anyways, pandemic, continued my training, lucked out, was fortunate to have, a job open up in Calgary as a zone medical officer of health. So took that. My partner's also in public health, so we were a little bit geographically constrained of let's find 2 jobs.
Yeah.
So she landed a job in public health in Alberta, so did I. And then, continued, I will say, during that time as well in parallel, got involved nationally with the Canadian Association of Physicians with Disabilities, so CAPD. Continue being involved with them today. Got more involved with the AMA as section president. And then, your work job evolves. So started as a zone MOH. I now, part of my role is disaster management, which I love. And then I'm now doing a little bit of work with HS in their accreditation space as well. So it's a lot of hats. They evolve over time, but I find I like the challenge. That's been my style.
Yeah.
And so I think it's all fitting. I know some of my colleagues, the amount of hats I wear, the amount of turbulence in day to day wouldn't work. But for me, I like it.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie within public health. So this works for me.
Yeah. Just to stay busy too. Like it sounds like it's a lot, but I always love hearing stories about how people got into their field because, when you're young, you just think like, okay, I'm going to do undergrad, I'm going to do med school, and then it's done. But it's never that simple.
No.
Yeah.
And I like that you mentioned serendipity pretty much all the way through. I can identify that with that as well. Sometimes what you think is going to be your trajectory isn't actually what it ends up being. And these opportunities present themselves. But if you have an open mind and you're willing to take it, and take a chance, then sometimes that could actually be better than what you thought you would be doing. So really excellent to hear that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I kind of like that piece about like having a residency that just fits well with you. And I think just starting career wise, that's true too. Like you go where your strengths take you. Clearly you had some leadership, some advocacy background that kind of took you in more board positions. And that's just kind of how life works. But I want to hear a little bit more about that advocacy piece that you mentioned towards the end. So a lot of people who don't have background in accessibility, and admittedly, I haven't done too much work in accessibility myself. It's not just ramps, elevators, that kind of stuff. So could you tell us some about some of the broader implications and why everyone should be paying attention for someone like me that doesn't know much?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it's a really important question. So within medical education, within the culture profession of medicine right now, we're talking a lot about equity, diversity, inclusion. One piece that CAPD's really been trying to elevate the bar is talking about accessibility in there. And so I'll use some traditional words to define it, and I'll also explain why I don't like the traditional language. So the traditional language would be disability, handicap, accommodations.
Yeah.
And I don't like any of these terms because it goes back to that medical model of disability. Something is wrong with the person. They are disabled. They need an accommodation.
Yeah.
It really speaks about how they are not part of the culture, not part of society. If we look at the most recent Stats Canada data, it's showing 27% of Canadians will identify as having a chronic disease or disability of some sort. Significantly higher if you look at it by age, over 65, that number goes even higher. I think the piece that is most striking to me is we've seen a 5% increase in that number since the last time the survey was done in 2021.
I didn't know that.
2020, 2021 data. So we're seeing the impacts of pandemic, we're seeing the impacts of mental health. So we know that folks are living with chronic conditions with some sort of impairment at times. And so what's interesting is in the medical space, the Canadian Medical Association did their physician health survey about the same time, shows similar sorts of numbers. About 20% or so of physicians will identify as having a chronic condition or disability. Interestingly, in the physician space, we are lower if we compare to the Canadian average for sensory and motor or mobility disability challenges. So we're not seeing folks who are wheelchair users, we're not seeing folks with sensory impairments in as high of a proportion in medicine. So really what this says to me is, right, we're not kind of there yet. And so that's why I like talking about accessibility as part of EDI or, IDE, however we want to put that acronym together. It's really including accessibility. How do we make sure that patients can see themselves in their providers?
Yes.
Right? And until we're at that spot where a patient can come into a clinic, into an emergency room, and see themselves, whether that's by skin color, that's by accent, that's by mobility device that may be used, we're not there yet. We haven't achieved that inclusion. So for me, I think accessibility is just really important. And, you alluded to it. We used to just think about this as ramps, elevators, automated doors, accessible doors. I'll give folks a challenge. Go to your local hospital, go to your local medical school, count how many doors are not automated or handicap accessible. How many washrooms are not barrier free? It's striking. And it's because it's old infrastructure. It's of a different era. And so it's just not yet at a piece of, okay, needs to be fixed. It gets done on the rotation, right? This is when this washroom is slated for upgrades. But I think it's really important, right? Is when you have a fifth to a quarter of our patients, maybe of the profession, identifying having chronic conditions, disabilities. I think it's really important that we start thinking about this of how do we do better and how do we move to that social model, societal model of disability.
I'm so glad we're having this episode, and especially with you being here as our guest. I think it's really powerful that our audience has an opportunity to hear this. I'm wondering, because a lot of the work that I do, that Shereen does, that we do together, is in not only the medical education space, but in undergraduate medical education. And so do you have examples, life experiences or experiences, and I think about, we think about patient experiences, but also your experiences throughout the medical education spectrum and I guess path. Is there anything that really stands out for you as sort of that starting point of when this was important from an advocacy perspective?
It's a great question. So for me, I don't think I was really aware of how ableistic policies were as I was going through medical school. I was aware of it in grad school. And so I'll give an example. So during my presidency with the Graduate Student Association in Calgary, we were relocated, grad studies was relocated to the old library tower. It's now been completely remodeled, but back in the day, we were moved there. Old washrooms there, like since when the building was built. So old, not accessible, tiny little doors to get in. And we all said, this isn't going to work. Like, you're moving hundreds of staff there. We have students coming there every day. These 2 tiny washrooms aren't going to work. We need to fix them. Wasn't at that point on the university's radar. They weren't slated for renovation. And a colleague and I, good friend, were there late at night. And I said to him, something just doesn't feel right about these.
Yeah.
And he has a construction background. And I said, hey, do you have a tape measure with you? So we went there, measured the doors, measured some turning radiuses, and realized that for any of our graduate students with mobility concerns using a wheelchair, if they came up to our offices, end of day, got to after hours, swipe card access would lock the building down.
Yeah.
They would actually be stuck on the second floor.
Yeah.
No ability to hit a washroom, no ability to exit.
Oh my God.
And so I sent a fairly candid email to university leadership and said, hey, this is an issue.
Yeah.
I didn't hear anything back. I was like, okay, well, we'll just wait. But I had a meeting with the dean of graduate studies the next day, and she said, what did you do? And I was like, that's not a good way to start off a meeting. What did I do about what? She's like, they're renovating the washrooms.
Oh, wow.
But it was because we advocated and said, this is like a justice and access issue.
Yeah.
And so washrooms got renovated. It was actually the first barrier-free washroom at the University of Calgary.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Kind of crazy.
That's kind of crazy.
It is kind of crazy. And that wasn't that long ago. It was like early 2010.
Yeah, I was
so
just going to say that's not that long ago.
yeah. So, so I knew about it in grad school, got into medicine, and I just didn't realize, how pervasive ableism is. Even, you're in lecture halls. You don't realize, you start at the top, long set of stairs down.
Yeah.
If there's a student who's a wheelchair user, you're maybe at the back, or you got to go down
The ramp.
Down the ramp, or you see, you're sometimes going into the basement, navigating that to come through the doors right by where the faculty is teaching.
And there's no option to sit.
No.
Except right close to where the podium is.
Right.
There's no choice.
Exactly.
That's where you have to go.
And so I started seeing that later on, not up front, but you started realizing there's just a lot of structural pieces where we are a bit ableist.
Yeah.
Same sorts of things with, gender inclusive washrooms, barrier free washrooms, same sort of things, that there's a lot of advocacy needing to be done to do something like change the sign on the door.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, it was a single stall closed, and we said, just instead of having a male one and a female, just say all gender barrier free
Bathroom.
done.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of red tape. And so I started seeing these sorts of pieces, and it's a bit of death by a thousand cuts,
Yeah.
right? Of one piece of ableism after another,
Yeah.
where now I'm a big advocate for, it's not this big A advocacy. It's not, you need to write to your MLA and get something done. It's this little a of how do we empower faculty? How do we empower those in leadership to, come together, change accommodations policies?
Right.
We've been successful now to change, lots of folks worked on this nationally, the technical standards. Some folks will know this in medical school jargon. We've just had a change to the technical standards to move away from these black and white, thou shall do XYZ, to more principles of what a medical student should be able to do.
Right.
That's a big change. Took us, better part of a decade to get there. But now that we have pieces of policy like that, I think we're moving forward. Next big thing I think we're going to see is changes to accommodations and accessibility policies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big next step.
Yeah.
You alluded to some really good points there. What about invisible barriers? Because that can be just as challenging, and you kind of briefly mentioned some. So can you maybe speak to some of the less obvious barriers that patients face, especially those from marginalized communities?
Yeah, no, great question. I think the big piece, and it again cuts across a lot, is stigma. We know that stigma from others, as well as self-stigma, is a big challenge for those living with a disability, those who are marginalized or underrepresented. It's that fear of, I was talking with a learner the other day about this, actually. They asked me a question saying, my family came to this country, they felt they worked so hard to get here to make a better life, and I don't want to undo all their hard work by speaking up.
Yeah.
And, you know, it really hit me. And I said, this is still the stigma that we're all folks are living. And we need to, as a medical school, as an institution, help correct.
Yeah.
Right? So that folks feel they have a voice. They can speak up for what's right, what they feel, you know, is their passion.
Yeah.
So I think that's really one of the big challenges is stigma is one.
Yep.
The other piece is just overall perception. I think right now, still within medicine, visible disabilities, visible needs, folks see.
Yeah.
But these invisible disabilities, visible, you know, need accommodations, needs, etc., or invisible ones are a little bit harder to see, less tangible. And I think we're still struggling on, you know, how do we do that? Frankly, my approach is the same as I take with patients. Let the patient set the parameters. They know themselves. A learner knows themselves best. They know what they need. Our job really should be, how do we help build the system? We set the safety parameters. As long as you're not hitting the safety parameters, let's support the learner.
Okay.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I love that. And kind of, you touched really beautifully on having this advocacy and creating that and getting that started. But to switch gears a little bit, let's kind of talk more about the medical education side. So you already kind of talked about EDI, and that's something that we learn in medical schools. And we have, a couple hours and blocks where we learn about EDI. But how can we shape education in a way that'll really change the future of healthcare providers? And are we doing enough? And I suspect the answer is no.
Great question. You're right. The answer is no. I think a big piece is we need to overemphasize. I don't want to say just bring up, but I think we really need to put at the heart of medicine social determinants of health. Medical expert is critically important. I know Royal College and CFPC are going through the CanMeds exercise now for what it'll look. And I know there's a lot of value of medical expert. And it's true, right? As a physician, we hold medical expertise. But I think what we also hold is understanding of how critical social determinants of health are in our experiences and our patients. And so I think that really needs to be, and like I say, overemphasized in medical school to the same emphasis we teach anatomy and physiology. So that medical students have that understanding. And then overlaid with that is we need to support medical students and faculty in understanding their intersectionality and their wheel of privilege or wheel of power. And so, I would offer that to everyone is kind of you can Google it, wheel of privilege, wheel of power, see where you are. Recognize your intersections, and then take that into every encounter you have. And as you're doing that, I think it's just really powerful, right? And I think the more we can do that, we're going to create a better medical education system, a better healthcare system.
Not to pat ourselves on the back, but that's what we do in foundations. We have it's not the wheel like the I guess the wheel of power. We've got the social identity wheel, and we do an exercise, the 5-minute poem with the students to start to get them to think about all their different social identities and the elements of intersectionality. And then we also have stories of the week, which is deliberate exploration of the intrinsic roles or the non-medical expert roles with community engagement, community advocates who come in and speak to students about it.
That's amazing.
So it's funny, as you mentioned, those are the two things that form some of the foundation of our course. And it's so that speaks to us because that has been something that's really been a driver for us in foundations, is to ensure that, yes, we do understand the centralization of the medical expert role and how that's been brought down by the Royal College as well as the College of Family Physicians. But that, especially in my work that I see, and then Shereen also brings in your own experiences as a patient, as someone that's gone through different encounters with the healthcare system as well.
Yeah.
It's more than just lip service to the intrinsic roles.
Exactly.
Like this will help you and your patients, not just your patients, but you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like that is the piece that I think is for your own personal development too. I think it's
Just as a
incredibly valuable.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think, I giving credit where it's due. I think medical schools are doing a much better job now than even when I went through of teaching this, right?
Yes.
As
Yeah.
you just alluded to.
It's on the radar, at least.
I think the challenge is how do we do this for how do we support faculty,
Yes.
right? And bring it into faculty development,
Yes.
Yeah.
right? Because, it's going to take us time to get that critical mass of, early career. I hate that term, right?
hate
But like,
that term so much.
I know I don't have a better term, but those of us who are,
The early adopters.
early
Oh,
adopters,
God,
the change agents, right? There's enough of us and learners are leading it, but until we have more faculty who also have embraced this way of thinking, and I will say, I think one of the challenges in practice and established docs have is they're burnt out. There's a lot of inertia.
Yeah.
And so it's how do we make this faculty development easy and also not a fear, right? Not something that they're feeling like they're being pushed aside or that they're wrong.
Yeah.
It's doing it in a very trauma-informed way for them so they can also embrace it. So I think lots of work to do, but I am optimistic.
Yeah.
I'm
Awesome.
glad you are. I'm so happy you are.
Yeah.
It's actually really great to hear that optimism.
Yeah.
Well, it's wonderful to have this conversation. Very, very enlightening. So thank you very much, Franco. We usually like to wrap up with the hardest hitting question. So we call this our friendship challenge. If you could instantly solve one accessibility issue in healthcare with a magic wand, emphasis on the magic part. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be feasible or anything like that right now. What would it be and why? And then there's a second part to that.
Yeah,
So
but
we'll start with this one first.
Yeah, it's a great question. So one thing I would change, and it goes back to a lot of what I was talking about from an accessibility magic wand, it would be nice to see the same proportion of individuals with disabilities, accommodations represented in healthcare, not just physicians, but across the board.
Not just physicians.
And I think for physicians, I will say it's a little bit harder because often physicians are contractors, they're not employees. It's a little bit harder, but magic wand across the board, same proportion, physicians who are wheelchair users, physicians who, have cognitive impairments, like appropriately, again, within the guardrails, practicing. I think it's absolutely critical that patients see themselves in their healthcare teams. So that would be, my wish is we wake up tomorrow and we see the Canadian populace represented in the healthcare workforce.
Yeah.
I agree. Do I get a chance to respond?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
I would actually say from an education standpoint, I'd love to see faculty representative of
Yeah,
that so
totally.
that students can see that.
Yeah, that's big.
And I just when I think about, again, as my role as a faculty member and what I can actually embody, I think it is really, really, really important when I've spoken to so many students over the years, and having that role model there that you can feel you can not only go to but look up to as someone that you can strive towards and say, hey, I have a place here, right?
Exactly.
And and that's not the case for huge segments of our population. Like no matter how much things have changed, even from when we went through med school, I look out into the class, man, and I just like some things have changed, but it's still very much the same composition. And I was one of those people, I remember, and I don't say, like I say this without a word of a lie. I was like, if I could give my seat up to somebody who was more representative of the I remember going into med school and being like, if I could give my seat up to somebody who was more representative of the population, I would. Because I remember looking out into the classroom, and then I look out now on the other side and I see, oh my God, it almost looks the same,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Like it almost looks the same. And granted, yes, that's just visibly, right? There's a lot of invisible pieces here that we're not taking into account. But medicine is always going to be one of the slower professions to change.
Yep.
So seeing faculty in that role,
Exactly.
I think would be incredibly helpful.
Yep.
So yeah, that would be my like magic wand broadly.
Yeah.
Just from a clinical standpoint, it would be translation services.
Yes.
Oh my good.
Oh
good
yeah,
God.
totally.
Oh my good God. Like even if it's like a Google earpiece or something like that,
Yeah.
that we can share
Yeah.
and just have a more seamless conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of my most challenging patients on both ends is the biggest barrier is the translation piece. And they are struggling with the inequality that exists in our healthcare system.
Yeah.
And like the intersectionality with these two patients that I have, you have to take into account all of their intersectional social identities in order to truly treat them.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest barrier is actually just that communication piece. And instead of having a translator in between who is, changing the
there's nuances, right?
Right? And it's nobody's, it's not the
It's just natural.
translator's
It's just
fault.
natural.
But if there was a magic way with AI, I don't know how to do it, where we could each, take our earpiece or something, I don't know if it's AR or whatever it is, where we can have a more seamless conversation so that they don't feel like that I'm like talking down to them. the whole time.
Or they're kind of on the periphery
Or they're on
of
the
something
periphery.
that's actually directly affecting them.
exactly.
It's so interesting you mentioned that. That actually came up in DL recently.
With the case 2?
Yeah, and also in not just that one, case 3
Oh,
actually.
okay.
So the
breast
communicating a breast cancer
Yeah.
diagnosis, communicating a difficult diagnosis. So one of the things that came up was, what if we have a communication barrier like this? Like it's a language barrier, or let's say we have an elderly patient doesn't
Right.
speak the language, and there's like a family member that's supporting them, and maybe there are cultural customs in terms of shielding the person from a
common.
difficult or terminal diagnosis. How do we honor the patient and let them know truthfully what's going on, and let them make decisions related to their health without having to go through somebody else, a third party necessarily? So very interesting that you mentioned that, because that would have applications in that setting
Huge.
as well.
Correct.
And I think too, I'll add dovetail to that. I think it also needs to come with appropriate funding, right?
Yeah.
I think we keep putting the burden on faculty, on the patient,
Yeah.
Patience.
and of you, right? And so we really it needs to come with funding. Like we need to walk the talk.
Yeah.
We have new legislation federally, provinces are talking
That's
about it.
Right.
It needs to come with dollars for clinics to be able to retrofit to have these tools. It needs to stop being on, the physician who wants to do this or the patient.
Yeah.
Because we know that living with a disability, we know, English as a second language, you have additional barriers and cost you more.
Right. Yeah.
Like dollar for dollar, what you're getting services wise.
Yeah.
So we need to stop taxing our patients,
Yeah.
and we need to have funding that comes so we can do this sort of transformative work.
Yeah, that's so important. It's not just advocacy, and it can be very exhausting having to constantly explain yourself, or as faculty being expected and have that responsibility to stand up. Like, why do you have to be thrown into that position necessarily? So a lot of it comes with that funding piece. If there was change being made in an easier way because the funding was there to back it up, instead of you just talking into a void, more people would want to speak up, because it takes a lot of mental energy to speak up and to do that advocacy piece. And to kind of go off on that point, Roshan, you were talking about kind of having that mentor. That's so important, as it's true of anything. And it's kind of how we manage to repair, at least to some extent, like women in surgery. Seeing women physicians is inspiring to a young woman going into surgery. And it's the exact same kind of concept. You need people in that position. You need to have that bit there, and I think that's so important to acknowledge.
That is, I can share my magic wand for that. So I'm an instructor, and I'm teaching students before they get into medical school, and as well as getting into medical school. So you know what I would do for my magic wand? If I could create either tools or an environment or something for instructors that want to do better, but they face a lot of constraints they face a lot of rules, they face a lot of barriers. So if I want to support a lot of students in their learning, sometimes I face rules and barriers and things that I'm not allowed to do, or that I'm highly criticized in doing.
Huge.
And I kind of have to adhere to these things, but I don't feel right about it. And as a result of kind of putting those things into practice, it shapes what the medical school population looks like. And then that shapes what the physicians look like, that patients encounter.
Yep.
And then people don't see themselves in any of that, either in the medical school group, in the faculty, in the clinicians that they encounter. So my magic wand is, I don't know what it would be, but it's something where an instructor could help everybody in a fair and equitable way in one classroom every semester.
Especially before the
Before they get
applying to
there.
medical school, because
And just to
we
help
see
people
that so
succeed and
often.
help
Totally.
them get to where they need to be or where they want to be to achieve their goal and achieve
Exactly.
their dream of getting into medical school. Because there are a lot of barriers that people face and they don't even get in the
because
first
part
place.
of the reason why the class doesn't look that different is because we have not eliminated those
Exactly.
barriers
Yep.
in
Yeah.
the pre-medical
in my
space.
world,
exactly.
there's so many barriers.
And so I'll say this from my disaster management space. I say, and this is steadfast, if a plan is 3 years old, it's ancient.
It's
It's
gone.
outdated. Same thing exists with policies. If a policy hasn't been thoroughly reviewed in 3 years, it's, in my mind, irrelevant.
Yeah.
And I think, universities move at glacial pace.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We need to speed it up. And I'll give you
Yeah.
a quick example. When I went to medical school, students needed to request accommodation if they were left-handed and wanted to write the exam with one of the desks in the lecture hall that had the left-handed flip.
Oh, I remember
That's
this.
insane.
Oh my God, yes.
So little things like this.
Yeah.
Being left-handed is part of the normal distribution.
Yeah.
It is not a disability.
Yeah.
You do not need an accommodation. But when we have policies like that,
Yeah.
it goes, it's little things like this that drive faculty up the wall, that put in barriers of just being able to do common sense stuff.
Yeah.
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 And it's just so frustrating to hear about, because you think about these policies, but the amount of effort and work it takes to change them, and people not listening is the source of the issue. It's people do say things, but it gets ignored, and it's that advocacy component and really pushing for that.
Yeah.
And to kind of go on my magic wand, I think a lot of this is based on fear, whether it's fear of change or fear of speaking up. From a medical student perspective, I'd say my magic wand would be to somehow just remove fear from the bodies of medical students. A lot of times our own preceptors, our own instructors say to us, try not to make too big of waves. CARMs will care. If you're going to question policy, be careful who you question. Don't name anybody by name. If you're going to question the government, don't say anybody by name. Speak very generally. And we hear this as students, and we think how hard we work to get into medical school. Well, am I going to throw it all away because I said something? So it's really frustrating, because that means that people, kind of like Shereen mentioned, they're abiding by policies they don't necessarily believe in. They tried to do something, but seeing that pushback, seeing your own mentors say that to you, makes you scared to do something. As someone in a position of power telling you that, as someone who's not a physician, I think, well, they must know better. I don't know how CARMS works. I don't know how the government works. I'm just going to take their word for it, because I didn't work this hard. My family didn't work this hard for me to get kicked out of med school for something. And just the thought is so flawed. Unfortunately, though, there is some truth to it. There are some repercussions, and I would love to remove that, to not have people get in trouble for advocating because it goes against policy. So I don't know how I would do that, but it's my scenario, so I'm going to do it.
Okay. Awesome. Well, suppose we all waved the magic wand and everything came true. How are we going to reward ourselves with a sweet treat? So what would your choice be, Franco?
So I'm a creme brulee suck. I really am.
You like that crack.
I know
right?
the crack. And I'll say, so my partner has an anaphylactic egg allergy. So I rarely get to have creme brulee anymore. And so, but that's totally fine. It's one where I'm like, it's just better than, having to whip out EpiPens. But it is one where it's again, magic wand, we're living in the perfect world, creme brulee.
Okay, awesome. How about you, Roshan?
Him and I have so much in common. I love creme brulee. So when he said it, I was like, I can't take that. I'm just gonna go back to the tried and true one.
Okay.
Because I ordered how many of them from Costco? It's
knew you were gonna say that.
Pop-Tarts, yeah, because we got to bring it in every single
Yeah.
year. We basically the first years it's their week before the midterm. So during our story of the week, our guest speaker, Dr. Eleanor Crawford, who's a family physician, anesthesia out of, actually she works in Iqaluit in the north. Yeah. She's a previous MSA president here, and she wanted to get lunch for the whole class. Mm-hmm. But we couldn't sort it out in time.
Yeah.
And so instead I went to Costco and got a whole bunch of stuff. And then I saw the Pop-Tarts there and I said I had to get it. Also the looks on people's faces.
Thank you for taking that hit for us, because I'm sure I know what those looks were like.
And I remember there was at least a couple of jealous guys looking at me like with their partners being like, I wish that was my car.
Right, yeah, right.
So I'm gonna say it's gonna be a Pop-Tart just to keep that going, that theme going. Yeah.
I'm gonna go with chocolate. Anything chocolate, and I don't have to get fancy. I'm not a fancy girl, so I'm okay with like a coffee crisp or a Kit Kat. I would do that.
That's a good one. I would say for myself, I love cheesecake. I sometimes used to treat myself after an exam. I used to get a whole cheesecake from Save On Foods.
Save On Foods cheesecake.
It's amazing.
Totally underrated.
It is.
Totally underrated. Specifically Save On Foods.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Their cakes in general.
Their
They
cakes in
have
general.
They
a
are good cakes.
a
You wouldn't
strawberry
expect it.
Black Forest, which is amazing.
Huh. Yeah, no, but their cheesecake specifically, like that is something that people should try because you would not expect that.
Grocery store cake in general is so underrated. My parents were throwing me a party for getting into med school, and they're like, any cake you want, name anything. And I said, I want a Safeway vanilla birthday cake.
Nice.
That is my
So good.
favorite
That's Roshan's
cake.
favorite.
Yes.
Favorite
Really?
cake. My favorite
That's my
cake.
favorite cake. It's so good, and nobody talks about it. And everybody was like, Santa, get a good, nice cake from a nice bakery.
Don't
and
sleep on grocery store cake.
yes, it tastes so much better. But anyway. Yeah, so thank you so much, Franco. This has been just a really interesting discussion, whether it was about cheesecake or whether it was about accessibility. We hope our listeners found it as inspiring as we did.
We appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. And to our listeners, don't forget to tune in next week when we'll be diving into another fascinating episode.
Thank you for joining us, Franco, and thank you for joining us, everyone. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, you can reach out to us anytime. So until then, stay curious, friends.
Catch you next time. Take care.